Finnish TV Dokumenteam present.
In the heart of India lie the ruins of a forgotten civilization. Here, for thousands of years, Hindu kings built spectacular palaces, mighty fortresses, and ornate temples. They worshipped sex. They cast their beliefs in stone. But they had to fight to preserve their way of life. Today, all that we know of their alien culture is the Kama Sutra. Our investigators are traveling to their ancient kingdom.
Some of the acts depicted are so acrobatic, they're enough to make an anthropologist blush.
To explore what drove them to create such explicit images.
You do feel slightly guilty looking at some of it.
And to uncover their world, a world of princes and concubines. A world where men devoted to the art of pleasure were also experts in the art of war. This is the lost world of the Kama Sutra. India, the world's largest democracy, but once a shifting territory of feuding tribes and warring clans. 1,000 years ago, here at Khajuraho, in the kingdom known as the Heart of India, a dynasty of Hindu kings called the Chandelas constructed an amazing city of temples. And yet, it's not their grandeur that has earned these temples their fame. What has made them notorious is sex. Our investigators, Kristen Romy and Alex Evans, have come here to India to see if they can uncover the truth about this extraordinary civilization and the world that its rulers built, the kingdom of the Kama Sutra. They believe these temples hold the vital clues to understanding a people for whom sex was not a taboo. They are the key to recreating a world completely different from our own.
You have the erotic art at the joining of the Great Hall and the hallway.
These explicit images of sex are the first clue to this ancient culture. They are derived from the Kama Sutra. This ancient Indian manual is now famed for its description of sexual positions. But it was written as a way of teaching people the central importance of sex and desire. It's a window into ancient Hindu beliefs. Archaeologist Kristen Romy has explored the pyramids of Egypt and the Great Wall of China, but nothing has prepared her for the temples at Khajuraho, covered with erotic art.
The detail here in this temple is absolutely amazing. I mean, just the amount of energy that's been poured just into this tiny little building.
Kristen is on a mission to decipher these carvings.
You turn into a single corner, and all of a sudden there's another whole sculptural unit. It's almost like Where's Waldo? It's absolutely remarkable.
And every figure, every detail has a sacred purpose. This is a religious text written in stone. The Kama Sutra means discourse on sexual love. Although it was compiled by Hindu scholar Vatsyayana over 1,500 years ago, the images it inspired at Khajuraho still have the power to shock.
Some of the acts shown are so acrobatic, almost bordering on the physically impossible, that they're enough to make an anthropologist blush.
As graphic as these carvings are, they are a vital clue into understanding an ancient way of life that now seems almost alien. For the Chandelas, sexual pleasure was a way to reach spiritual enlightenment. It played a central role in religious life. Prostitutes even plied their trade in the temple grounds. They were dancing girls who performed at religious festivals, but also provided the priests with sexual favors. Alex Evans is a stonemason, expert in the construction of ancient buildings. He compares the work he sees at Khajuraho to that of the builders of Europe's great Christian churches.
The way that the human figure is depicted here is very different to what you'd see in a typical medieval cathedral. Here it is very sensual.
But he wants to see beyond the figures, to know how the building beneath is still standing after 1,000 years. If the figures are an expression of religious devotion, the structure itself is the product of tremendous effort and engineering skill.
It is very difficult to tell when it's so covered in carving everywhere, the actual construction behind it.
Placing himself in the position of the temple builders, Alex sees this stone pillar as evidence of remarkable craftsmanship.
What we've got here is one single piece of stone, probably weighing in the region of 2 tons. It's impressive to see them in one piece of stone, because normally you'd build them out of a set of pieces. Because if there were any weaknesses in one massive piece of stone, this whole thing would come crashing down.
But these pillars alone are nowhere near strong enough to support the huge weight of the temple's great main spire. It's as tall as the Statue of Liberty, but at 5,000 tons, it's 20 times heavier. Alex enters the inner sanctum of the temple, which lies directly beneath it. Compared to the circumference of the outer walls, the space inside is tiny.
It's the sort of the inner sanctum, so it has its other meaning here other than just being a support, but they've had to make it so massively thick inside to take that weight.
This wasn't just the innermost shrine. It was the rock on which the spire was founded. In the rest of the temple, a framework of vertical pillars supports horizontal beams and the roofs above. But to hold up the main spire, the builders created what was in effect a giant hollow pillar. The Chandelas built high because they wanted their spires to represent mountain peaks. They believed their god Shiva lived in the Himalayas. This Hindu god takes on many forms. At Khajuraho, he is still worshipped as the creator of life, and the Chandelas celebrated him as such throughout the temples. These temples burst with sensuous images of gods and mortals in erotic poses. They are all reminiscent of descriptions in the Kama Sutra. 646 figures adorn one temple alone. Their erotic displays incurred the wrath of Muslim warlords who were looting and burning Hindu temples throughout northern India. For these Muslims, depictions of the naked body were an affront to their religion, and they would have to be destroyed. But the Chandelas were not merely temple builders with a taste for the exotic. From her study of the carvings, Kristen has discovered that the temples also reveal them to be warrior kings. They were schooled in the art of battle. And the time would come when these people, devotees of pleasure and the arts of love, would have to fight to defend their erotic temples and their way of life. Our investigators have discovered that here in India, over a millennium ago, a Hindu dynasty created some of the most astonishing temples in the world. Adorned with graphic displays of human sexuality, these temples depicted scenes known to us from the Kama Sutra, the world's first erotic text. But the Hindu king's way of life set them on course for conflict. Their Muslim enemies considered the depictions of sex on these temples to be an insult to their religion, and they sought to destroy them. By examining the temple carvings, Kristen Romy has discovered that the Hindu kings portrayed themselves as powerful warriors. They defended their temples of sex from the mighty hilltop fort of Kalinjar. It lies 70 miles northeast of Khajuraho. At its height, Kalinjar contained a mighty garrison, There were 36,000 horses, 45,000 foot soldiers, and 640 elephants. This was the military center, the Pentagon of the Chandela Kingdom. Kristen travels to the remote fort of Kalinjar to search for evidence of the Chandela kings and the lengths they went to protect their temples.
We only have evidence for a handful of buildings on the fort's surface right now from the Chandela period. But given what we know about Khajuraho, there had to have been some Chandela buildings on top of this fort to support all the people that were required to have actually defended this territory.
This is the carved stonework that would once have been part of the great Chandela buildings. But the once grand avenues are now reduced to rocky footpaths that twist through crumbling ruins. So Kristen is looking for archaeological clues to understand how the Chandelas could stand up to a brutal Muslim onslaught and thereby save their erotic temples back in Khajuraho. The remains of Kalinjar's huge fortifications, stretching nearly 5 miles in length, now lie broken around the rim of the high forested plateau. But 1,000 years ago, it was a formidable barrier. It would face its greatest test in 1019, when a fierce army of Muslim raiders arrived from Afghanistan. They laid siege to it with a ferocious army of tens of thousands of soldiers accompanied by military drummers.
This handful of drummers that you hear is from a celebration on the village below. Now, just imagine thousands and thousands of Afghan troops amassing on this plain, ready to lay siege to Kalinjar Fortress. Kind of scary, isn't it?
This battle-hardened army had struck fear into India's kingdoms for over 2 decades. Now, the wealth of the Chandelas and the temples of sex at Khajuraho became its target. But taking on Kalinjar Fort would not be easy. The troops faced a steep 700-foot climb through thick jungle, then sheer cliff faces, protected by swarming killer bees, with massive stone walls rising above. Any assault the troops launched was easily repelled. So they surrounded the mountain fort and laid siege, cutting off supplies to the Chandela's army. Kristen wants to know how the Chandelas could possibly hold out, and meets local guide AJ Singh, who has agreed to show her a new discovery that could hold the answer. This staircase, dug into the cliffs, provided the Chandelas with covert access to the slopes below.
Look at this.
It would also provide them with a very precious resource.
I mean, this looks like it's carved from hewn rock, but then you see slabs here and there as well. It's remarkable that this entire thing has been hewn out of rock. You can still see the marks from the carvers. Not as delicate as the temples. Now it's getting really dark.
Only when she reaches the bottom does the purpose of the staircase become clear.
They must have been collecting the rainwater for sieges.
There is a vast underground reservoir.
Because they had sieges that were going on for almost like a year at a time, so they had to collect a lot of water.
This was the key to the Chandela's survival. 100 feet long by 40 feet across by 10 feet deep, it held nearly 300,000 gallons of water. Constantly fed by underground springs, carefully engineered reservoirs like this were as important to military success as the defenses above. The mountain on which Kalinjar Fort was built dominated the landscape. From here, the Chandelas controlled the passage of anyone wishing to enter their kingdom. They would repel Muslim invaders for over 200 years. As well as being 5 miles long, the defensive walls were 3 stories high and up to 10 feet thick. Kalinjar was built for war, and yet, even here, the Chandelas were driven to construct magnificent temples. But unlike in Khajuraho, these were not erotic temples of sex. These were built to celebrate the ultimate warrior.
This hill has been holy since very ancient times, and it remains so today. Now, for the Chandelas, at Khajuraho they worship Shiva, the giver of life. But here, at the fort, they worship Shiva, the destroyer.
This statue is 24 feet high and depicts an 18-armed Shiva in battle pose. It was their belief in this god of destruction that impelled the Chandelas to build this fortress at Kalinjar and to defend their kingdom in battle. It was their confidence in their military strength that led them to celebrate Shiva's destructive powers, here in sight of their enemies. This temple was not always open to the sky. 1,000 years ago, these carved columns would have supported a pyramid roof. It covered the entrance to an inner shrine carved from the rock face. Kalinjar Fort saved the erotic temples of Khajuraho from destruction and shielded the Chandelas' realm from Muslim occupation. It would buy them time for their religion and the way of the Kama Sutra to flourish. In victory, they would expand their temple city to cover an area of over 5 square miles. Next, we reveal the true extent of what they achieved in that time. Archaeologist Kristen Romy is in the heart of India. She has discovered that a dynasty of warrior kings went to great lengths to protect their city of temples. Temples decorated 1,000 years ago with erotic art and inspired by the Kama Sutra. Our investigators will now hunt for evidence of the scale of this city. Today, the temples that are still standing have survived the ravages of time, enemy attacks, and encroaching jungle. But this is only a fraction of what would have been one of the most extraordinary cities in India.
Today, there are 25 temples at Khajuraho. A legend has it that there used to be 85 temples here. That's more than 3 times the number of temples currently here today. I'm going to go find out if that legend is true.
So Kristen sets out to search for the lost temples beyond the center of Khajuraho. Stonemason Alex Evans continues to examine the temple walls. He is investigating how so many temples could be built in only 100 years.
I don't think these joints are original. They've been repaired with a very hard cement. Pink is probably from the colour of the actual sand that's been used, but it doesn't give a clear idea of just how fine these joints probably would have been, and I'd like to see evidence of that.
The repair work has made it hard for Alex to understand how these temples were built. He needs to find one that hasn't been restored. 1.5 miles outside Khajuraho, near the village of Jatkari, recent excavations have revealed the remains of a huge temple. Until 1999, this site looked like a vast mound of earth and rock. But archaeologists then revealed a temple platform covered in carvings.
Now, this site is an archaeologist's dream. From what we know about these other temples in Khajuraho, only a small amount of the actual temple is revealed. But what is revealed has been remarkably preserved. And here's this fantastic little frieze of warriors and elephants going off to war. And the detail here is amazing. You can see his little belt and the reins on the elephants and this little procession here. It's just magnificent, which just makes me want to go out and look for some more stuff, which I'm going to do right now.
The carvings are remarkably preserved. This is a promising sign. It means there could be more temples out there under other mounds. Alex Evans believes that the base of the collapsed temple could give him the answers that he couldn't find at the temples in Khajuraho.
The joints are mainly around 1 millimeter or less. They're so tight, each stone is tailored to the next. To show you how expertly crafted this is, I've got this dollar bill here. This was a test that we actually use on site as well today, just to see how tight the stonework is. It's pretty tight, which is a pretty good sign of how accurately they work to.
This is the evidence Alex was looking for. It confirms his belief that no mortar was needed and that iron clamps locked the stone tightly in place. While parts of the lower levels of the temple are still intact, the superstructure has collapsed and now lies littered around the site. These fragments give Alex a unique opportunity. He thinks he has uncovered the technique the temple builders used to make their elaborate designs.
This male-female jointing, this being the female end, is actually something very difficult to do in stonework. Getting large pieces of stone to fit together. I'd be interested to see if there was a male end to this.
He hunts the field of stone for the right piece to fit into this block.
Here we are. Actually see the tool marks still on it. And it's made slightly smaller as well. Just so that there's some play.
Alex has discovered that this system of interlocking stone fragments, much like a 3D puzzle, enabled the temple builders to engineer complex but strong designs. With the whole temple now in pieces around him, Alex uses his expertise to analyze the stonework with forensic precision. He can decipher each and every mark on the stone and reveal the step-by-step process used by these forgotten craftsmen over 1,000 years ago.
These larger marks here are created with a tool called a punch. It's shaped in this way to take more material off. You've got more force going behind a smaller point. As you were working, you'd be swinging, cutting across like this. You can actually see the diagonal lines where they've cut. And where you have these indentations is where the chisel actually stopped. It stopped there, and it stopped there, and here. I'd be very interested to see if there are any other stonemasons or carvers working in the same way today.
The ruined state of this lost temple is a window into the lives and techniques of the temple builders. From what our investigators have discovered at the site, we can now reveal the temple that once lay beneath centuries of dirt and rocks. It stood on a vast platform 15 feet longer than the largest standing temple. And at possibly 115 feet high, it towered symbolically to the sky. Kristen, spurred on by the preservation at the ruined temple, searches the area around it.
The size of this site is really impressive.
She discovers another mound, only 150 yards away, still covered in undergrowth.
Wow.
Could this be another of the missing temples?
I mean, you have entire statuary just lying on the ground and nobody bothers to take it, which is a wonderful thing.
Just by brushing away some dirt, Kristen makes a remarkable discovery, a temple statue.
And this only belongs to one temple. And then allegedly you have 59 other ones belonging to Khajuraho. And they're all under farmers' fields, in the pastures. It's what makes Khajuraho such a wonderful place.
Unseen since the time of the Chandelas, the statue is proof of another missing temple. This is evidence of the richness, size, and scale of the temple city. If the myth of 85 temples is true, This is only one statue of tens of thousands made in just 100 years. Struck by the sheer effort that went into construction, Alex visits a small workshop in Khajuraho. He wants to experience the job of the craftsman for himself.
What's amazing is that this is probably exactly the same sort of thing they were doing 1,000 years ago at the temples. You'd have the specialist carver, you'd have the mason, and you'd have the people roughing out the stone like this.
The now peaceful farmland would have resounded with the constant sound of chisel on stone.
You start to appreciate the numbers of people that they'd have carving on the temple. Hundreds, thousands possibly over time. Generations of stone carvers, fathers and sons, just all there carving, the knowledge sort of being passed on.
Alex learns that starting from a solid block of stone, carving a sculpture like this takes 60 days.
I think if I was to be asked to do something along these lines with these tools, I'd probably change career.
In fact, with 25 temples still standing and over 50 more mounds lying unexcavated around Khajuraho, the legend of 85 temples could indeed be true. Using computer graphics, we can now reveal what this vast temple city would have looked like at the height of the Chandela's power. Temple on temple, rising through a thick jungle canopy over an area covering 5 square miles. The Chandela dynasty celebrated their culture at Khajuraho, creating temples and sculptures that would fire the imagination for over 1,000 years. It would be another 5 centuries before the rulers of the land of the Kama Sutra would reach such prominence again. What they would build would be more extraordinary still. Here in India, at Khajuraho, our investigators have revealed the full extent of a magnificent 1,000-year-old city famed for its erotic temples. They have discovered that the Chandelas defended their kingdom from Muslim invaders, and it flourished. But 5 centuries later, the inheritors of this kingdom would face an even greater Muslim force. Now, our investigators are here, 110 miles west of Khajuraho, at the island citadel of Orcha. They will learn how these Hindu kings also celebrated the delights of the Kama Sutra. Archaeologist Kristen Romy wants to understand the people who inhabited this world.
It must have been a fantastic beacon of Bundela magnificence.
She will explore the ruins for clues to the sensual life this royal dynasty led. Ancient stone expert Alex Evans will investigate the technology behind their imposing structures. This is advanced engineering on a grand scale.
And then here, this amazing gateway, incredible amount of detail.
Dramatically positioned on a rocky island, enclosed by a loop in the Bechwa River, Orcha was the Hindu king's stronghold. But, like the builders of the temples at Khajuraho before them, they lived in fear of destruction at the hands of Muslim enemies. So the island was ringed not only with water, but with great fortifying walls. Alex travels to the outer limits of Orcha to investigate the first line of defense. This will tell him what kind of warriors these Hindu kings were.
Very intimidating wall.
It's over 20 feet thick and stretches for 4 miles.
If you were trying to approach the palace, your goal was the palace over there, you've got to get through this, which looks like it was made to keep elephants out. It's huge.
On closer investigation, Alex discovers that no mortar has been used to hold the wall together.
The only thing that has probably helped to keep it stable as they were building it are these things called snecks, which are just smaller wedges of stone, which have just been pushed in the gaps just to steady the stones.
Alex has learned that the Bundelas meant business. These high walls were designed to withstand a great attack. But Orcha was much more than just a fort. It was famed as a pleasure palace, where the Hindu kings would live a life of excess and sexual indulgence. Chasing the legacy of the Kama Sutra, Kristen Romy meets architectural expert Priyaleen Singh to bring Orcha's ruins to life.
This is the residence of Rai Praveen, who was a courtesan, and she was a lady of immense qualities. She was very beautiful.
But she wasn't married to the king.
No, but she was his favorite courtesan.
This palace was designed specifically for the indulgence of the sensual arts. It incorporated areas for erotic dancing and an underground apartment for cool summer sleeping. There was an intimate rooftop boudoir for the king's personal gratification.
Now, you said she was a courtesan. Now, what exactly does a courtesan do?
Well, a courtesan was an essential part of the court, where she would entertain the king through singing, dancing. She would be trained in poetry. She would be very beautiful.
Yeah, because from the looks of this, I mean, it's such an extraordinary building. She must have been an extraordinary entertainer to warrant such a place. And so this obviously must have been, her sugar daddy, in a sense, when you look at it.
This courtesan would woo the king into her arms by singing up at his palace.
And it would have been truly, truly magical on a moonlit night, the fragrance wafting.
And she would sing right out towards his palace here, huh?
Yes.
And so she would have had silk curtains in here as well, sort of billowing in the night, plush carpets.
With the evidence that Kristen has uncovered, we can now reveal that this would have been a pleasure palace as painted in original depictions of the Kama Sutra. Intimately lit with candles, with every comfort for an exotic night under the stars. It was designed with open arches on all sides to catch even the slightest of evening winds. But these fairy tale surroundings of silk drapes and candlelight masked a grim reality for less fortunate girls in the king's court.
Based on what we've seen here at this palace, you would think that the life of a courtesan was a very sort of romantic lifestyle, but in reality, courtesans very often were sold into the lifestyle as spoils of war or sold to the court as very young, unwilling girls. And then you had to work your way up the ladder with treachery and deceit to sort of win the favors of kings. So in real life, the life of a courtesan was not necessarily all love poems and pretty songs.
This courtesan was one of the lucky ones. Her skills of seduction and sexual gratification won her a palace to pleasure her master. It had private gardens to stimulate the senses, and even technology far ahead of its time.
And just notice the irrigation system as well.
Oh, yeah.
You have these, the central channel, which is then feeding each one of these beds.
At Orcha, engineers created complex water channels to produce an early form of air conditioning. We can now reveal how this system would have kept the king and his courtesan cool in their underground bedroom. Pools on either side of the apartment were filled with water. Air vents were inserted just above the level of the pools. These were angled downwards to channel wind into the underground apartment. As wind passed over the surface of the water, it was cooled and sucked down, displacing the hot air inside. With a pool on either side, the system ensured a cool breeze even if the wind should change direction. For the Bundela nobility of the Hindu court, This air cooling technology was a huge status symbol. But Kristen has noticed that the technology was not designed by Hindu engineers. It was Muslim, the technology of their sworn enemies, the Mughals. Our investigators are now on a mission to find out why Muslim technology was employed at a Hindu fortress. They have revealed the playboy lifestyle of Orcha's royalty, but they will discover that the Hindu kings were on a quest for survival. With Muslim invaders on the rampage, the Hindu kings would have to go to great lengths to shield their kingdom. And not by building fortifications, but by constructing one of the most sensational palaces in all of India. Our investigators are at the medieval pleasure palaces of Orcha in India. They have discovered that these palaces, constructed within a mighty island citadel over 400 years ago, were engineered to celebrate sex and excess. But archaeologist Kristen Romy has discovered that the technology they employed to cool their rooms was the technology of their Muslim enemies, the Mughals. For 50 years, the Mughals had ransacked and fought their way through India to expand their empire. They destroyed anyone who stood in their path. Our investigators are now uncovering how the Hindu kings used feats of construction to hold on to their power.
Now this is a house. That's a palace.
This is on the outside. Imagine what the inside would have been like.
The Hindu kings agreed to a peace treaty with the Mughals, and in a bid to secure this alliance, they constructed an imposing palace to welcome the Muslim Mughal warlord. They poured their resources into the engineering not of warfare, but of pleasure. Kristen Romy learns from Priyaling Singh how they sought to impress.
It looks absolutely gorgeous right now, but what would it have looked like, back during the Bundela time?
Well, it would have been a sparkling white with all the lime wash and
It must have been a fantastic beacon of Bundela magnificence. Can we go take a look inside?
Sure, let's go.
Cool.
Leaving the edge of the island, Kristen and Priyaling explore the citadel to search for clues that will allow them to understand what this palace would once have looked like. Before, in the heart of India, the Hindu kings were forced to fight to protect their temples of sex. Now, these kings were using architecture as a tool for diplomacy. This great palace was built as a sumptuous welcome gift for their former enemy, the Mughal warlord Jahangir, who visited in 1606. To make it as imposing as possible, they aimed to build high. Alex Evans, an expert in ancient stone technology, has discovered the building's massive foundations. Here, he can unlock the secrets of the palace engineers.
It's almost crypt-like, this space under here, the sort of thing you'd see in cathedrals and churches. Very quick to put this together, but they had to make it massively thick to take the sheer weight above again.
Alex makes a remarkable find that ties the builders of Orcha to the Chandela temple engineers of Khajuraho.
And then over here, we've actually got these two huge stone, what look to be stone lintels, actually sort of to take some of the weight above, while they were also sort of putting this archway in here.
The engineers of Orcha were now using Mughal arches to support their structures. But just as the builders of Khajuraho had done 500 years earlier, they still used simple stone lintel technology to provide strength. With outer walls up to 15 feet thick, the palace could rise over 120 feet high to dominate the landscape. If the Hindu kings could dazzle the Mughal warlord, they might be able to secure a lasting peace. If not, they would face an uncertain future under occupation. So the Hindu kings consciously adopted Mughal design features. These are everywhere: domes, arches, geometrical patterns.
It is a very interesting synthesis of Mughal and Hindu architecture.
Right.
At the same time, the builders covered their palace in their own Hindu images of exotic birds and animals.
Now here the elephants seem to flank the entire courtyard.
While it still retains its aura of grandeur, this palace, as a temple to seduction and diplomacy, is no longer the spectacle it was designed to be. Searching the maze of rooms on the upper floors, our investigators hunt for evidence that will allow us to see the palace through the eyes of the Mughals on the day of their visit.
Possibly here we've got some measurements.
They find marks made by forgotten builders and decoration that would once have covered this palace.
Now, what about this glaze work here, all these beautiful, brightly colored designs? Where is this coming from?
It's a stylized form of a lotus, which is an Indian motif. But as far as the technique goes of blue tile work, that's certainly come through the Mughals.
Through the Mughals, okay.
Yes.
So it's another one of these great hybrids that we're seeing here in the
Right.
palace.
And also you would have had paintings all over. The surfaces which didn't have the blue tiles would have had the painting.
Yeah, you could see a little bit of that here and there.
These may only be fragments of tile and paint, but they are essential clues to what the palace would have looked like in its heyday. This fusion of two divergent cultures created a unique architectural style that successfully seduced the Mughals and saved the Hindu kings. Having pieced together the clues, we can now reveal what it would have looked like in all its glory. It was the jewel of Orcha, encrusted with shining turquoise and lapis-colored tiles. Bright